Welcome to Roundabout Oxford, a podcast from the University of Mississippi Libraries.
Today's podcast is all about artificial intelligence and will feature a conversation between librarians Alex Watson, Brooke Gross, and Harley Rogers, and Marc Watkins and Guy Krueger from the Department of Writing and Rhetoric. Stay tuned at the end for the newest segment of What's Plaguing Us by University Health Services Director Alex Langhart.
Hi there, my name is Alex Watson. I am a research and instruction librarian at the University of Mississippi Libraries. I'm joined today by my colleagues Harley Rogers and Brooke Gross. Would you both introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Brooke Gross. I'm a research and instruction librarian and assistant professor here at the university.
Hi, and I'm Harley Rogers. I am the science librarian and assistant professor also here at the University of Mississippi.
And we are joined here today by Marc Watkins and Guy Krueger. Would you mind introducing yourselves real quick?
Sure. My name is Marc Watkins. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric.
I'm Guy Krueger. I am the Writing 101 curriculum chair and core lecturer in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric.
And I understand that you all are both involved with the university committee regarding AI and similar types of things. Would you mind telling us exactly what that group is and what it's working on?
Well, the AI task force is a university-wide sort of initiative to look at how the technology can be implemented across disciplines and seen sort of areas that different faculty, staff, and other academic units can use it. Within our department, we started a working group called the AI Working Group about how to actually use the tools specifically with our actual students with our teaching of writing and also for research as well, too.
Now, when people say AI, are they talking about an actual artificial intelligence like HAL, or is it more of a nuanced type of term in the way that we're using it?
I think it's more of a marketing term and technique that makes people think of HAL 9000 when really all it is a very fancy algorithm with some really impressive computer power behind it. There's no sentience, there's no reasoning behind it, at least not human level reasoning or human level sentience. So when we say AI, we don't mean the HAL 9000 or the Matrix. That would be too exciting. This is much more of a word prediction or next token prediction type of software.
Along the same lines, talking about prediction and tokens and things like that, would either of y'all be willing to give us a quick layman's overview of how you see this technology actually working? Like it predicts things. How does it do that exactly?
Well, how does it do that? It's not that much different from your actual text prediction that we've all seen in our emails over the last 4 or 5 years. It's just much more sophisticated. And what it does, it takes a string of tokens. In this case, the tokens are the actual letters, and it makes a best guess about what you want for the next actual token based off of a prompt that you put in there. So it's very sophisticated. And that token prediction can involve a really big prompt. It could be an entire essay or entire piece of writing. Other people are using this for images, for diffusion prompts and diffusion-based engines. There are ones for music, for language, for other ones too, besides just text. And of course, there are those for coding as well too. So it's a lot of different ways you can use this tool that all go underneath the umbrella of generative AI.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that, talking about, layperson, is that people have been using forms of AI for years, and I don't think they've thought about it in ways. I think that recent developments of ChatGPT and some other tools have shifted the conversation and made people more aware of what this technology is capable of. If you're texting or you're on email or doing internet searches, that AI has been in effect for years, and people have used that without much commotion.
I mean, there's AI right now we're recording on Zoom. If you turn on the actual captioning, that's natural language processing, that is a form of AI. But this level of it is far more different. The thing that's making headlines right now is Microsoft launching Bing's own chatbot with some version of GPT. And they have that fine-tuned in a way that it actually argues with people. Kevin Roose of the New York Times writing on Valentine's Day about how he had just a lovely Valentine's Day dinner with his wife, and then the chatbot said, no, actually, you don't love your wife. You're not actually in love. You're not actually happy, even though he was going back and forth. So that's not consciousness. That's just another example of it being fine-tuned for a different purpose. No one really knows why they did that for Bing's chatbot. Some people are speculating that it's a feature of the system to get people to sort of go in and try to test it out. Others are saying it's a bug. But it just adds another dimension to what we've already been dealing with for the last few years now.
You were talking about people not really knowing what was going on there. What kind of data do these chatbots and things get trained on? How do they know how to talk like a person and to predict the next thing that we might be going to say?
So a language model is built on what's called a transformer. And a transformer takes massive amounts of information scraped from the internet, learns from it in some ways, not how we learn from things necessarily, but we use that term learning here because we don't want to, anthropomorphalize, I can't even speak today, what the machine's actually doing. But it does begin to make connections between what it's actually trained on and what it can actually be reproduced from it. So the tools, the very early versions of this were made by scraping vast chunks of the internet. And they were really sort of their first use case was, well, maybe this can be used as a blogging tool to make even more low quality content for the internet too. They've since have evolved quite a bit in a very short amount of time, but that is sort of the basic architecture underneath it, just a vast amount of data that's trained for that it can then be able to reproduce.
You said scraping. What does that mean for in the context of somebody who's not up on their internal Google mechanic?
The internet and the way OpenAI, Google, Meta, and a lot of these other tech companies are making this argument is that it was fair use to scrape massive amounts of data, even copyright data from the internet to train these new models. They said that this is in the public interest for the actual development of the technology. I have some issues with that. I think a librarian like yourself might also have some issues with that, but that is their argument. Some of this was open source from Wikipedia. A lot of it was comments on Reddit, which has a lot of really, really dark connotations for the actual bias built in these systems. Because once you train a language model, it sort of forms its own understanding of our world, our language, our text, based off of the bias it actually gets in there. There's bias in Wikipedia, very much so Western bias too. You ask a model, standard jobs for a man, standard jobs for a woman, it gives you an incredibly sexist response because of the data too. But then you ask it something that was trained on data from Reddit, a joke that would be incredibly inappropriate and insensitive to any type of audience you can imagine, and it can also reproduce that.
So what I'm hearing then is that folks, the companies that we're used to talking about, or folks in China or whoever, are going out and just taking huge amounts of text off of the internet, possibly without permission, loading them into these systems, and then using that information to allow the systems to make better, or in some cases, simply more interesting responses to you. Am I summarizing that right?
Yeah, although I'd change possibly to definitely taking without permission. So.
Along the same lines, you mentioned earlier that some of these tools had actually already been used in the classroom by your working group. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your experience using those so far and what that's taught you?
Sure. I'll kind of introduce some of the tools and let Guy kind of talk about his experience using the tools, teaching with his students. I taught online in the fall, so I had a very structured experience of introducing this technology to the students. I think other people who were teaching face-to-face had a lot more freedom in what they were doing with the actual technology. But we wanted to actually focus on versions of generative AI that could be used in an assistance role. That isn't right now what ChatGPT is. ChatGPT is kind of like this gigantic freight train that moves along. You really have to sort of like wrangle it to slow down and do it in sort of an assistance type role. The two apps we used were using GPT-3, that's the predecessor to ChatGPT, and they were called Format and Elicit. And Format is basically set up as a writing assistant that uses a gigantic spatial canvas where you can kind of pull different windows and tabs all across the screen and work with different versions of text. Some of that text is what you've written. Some of it's actually generated by the AI. You can also generate images and work on that too. So It's a really kind of a weird experience for a lot of students who are used to working linearly. And when we did work with the linear tools, we looked at Elicit, which is a database that actually integrates GPT-3 for open access research articles, and also has some very straightforward commands like setting up a research question or exploring a counterargument or looking at stakeholders for a particular topic. Now, I'll let Guy go and talk about how his students experience using those tools, and I'll mention how mine did too.
Sure. So I had two sections in the fall that used, three small sections in the fall that used AI for two projects. One was an argument essay, and two was a multimodal project. In the argument essay, students used Elicit and Fermat at early stages to narrow down research questions. So students might enter a topic they're interested in writing about. And Elicit has tools that, for instance, will take that topic and generate research questions, more focused college level research questions, which is a great service because a lot of students have trouble doing that. They know they might want to write about college athletes or whatever the case may be, but they don't know exactly what. Even when they know they want to write about NIL, that's still a broad topic. So the AI was very helpful in generating more narrowed research questions. Also, what Elicit does, as Marc alluded to, is lead students to articles related to that, and can help narrow down once they find things. So you can if you kind of like library resources that you're familiar with, Alex, find a source that's valuable. You can star that source, and that will lead you to more sources like that. One of the other cool tools that some of the AI had was a counter-argument tool that I believe Marc Watkins should take some credit for, because he suggested it to the creators of Fermat. Another area where students, first-year college writers, struggle with a lot is counter-argument. They're good at making their points sometimes and seeing one side of things, but not speaking to an audience with more objective tone and showing what other points of view are. And so Fermat is a tool that would, if students entered their topic, would produce bits of text on counter-argument. So not only letting students know what are counterpoints to that argument, but writing a little bit for them, bringing those ideas down the road a little bit. My students also did a multimodal project, which was a visual recreation of their argument essays. And my requirements for that assignment was nothing could come from any source other than AI. So they used a plugin from Fermat called Lexica, which is all AI generated images. And my students had very mixed opinions on that. Some of them liked that, and it challenged them to use different search terms because some of these apps are limited in what they can generate. Some of them were frustrated and would rather go to Google or wherever else online to find images or even create their own at times, because the AI was, in their words, more narrow than what they could find in other areas.
That's definitely how my students use it too. When we looked at the tools, we were really thinking about what Guy was talking about, two specific pain points in the students' writing and research project for our first year writing students that they would historically really struggle getting past. And so we wanted to do a very limited, almost like sort of engagement of this technology, because again, if you don't have a structured sort of pathway when you introduce AI to your students, especially an AI writing generator, that's where things kind of go off the rails, so to speak. You get a situation where students start generating too much text or not understanding how that might impact their own voice, their own understanding of research, how to actually cite using the tool, or actually just acknowledge using the tool in some way, shape, or form. And really what we were trying to do in the fall, of course, this is well before ChatGPT, and this was all like theoretical, like maybe one day this Microsoft would adopt this. Now that day is here. A few months later, which is crazy to think about, is just to get as much possible reflective writing from our students to see how this is impacting their process. Because we have no data whatsoever about what generative AI at all does to a student's writing and research process. We have nothing. We have our own assumptions that this is either going to possibly be helpful or harmful if it's used in these certain instances, but we don't know.
Yeah, in fact, the data we have at this point is the reflections that Marc and I collected from students. I would say Marc and I probably have some of the most data in the world right now. So.
I have a follow-up question. One of the university's kind of core priorities right now from the quality enhancement plan is critical thinking. And y'all mentioned in both of your scenarios about using AI to help students build counter arguments and come up with research questions and things like that. Do you think that there is a danger in replacing that part of the research process? Did you see in your reflections that students were, I don't want to say taking advantage of that, but do you think that there's a danger there in using AI in that way?
I think it's a great question. So I would answer it in a couple of ways. I think that certainly some people are going to see a danger there, but I can also say I see opportunity there. So for example, if I were going to generalize my students' reflections, a lot of the better students weren't big fans of the AI. They thought it was tripping on their processes that they're used to. For some of the less experienced writers, the AI was a very helpful tool because it got them to ideas that they weren't coming to on their own. We don't know where some of the things will go. Obviously, one of the concerns is that, AI will generate whole essays. But for my purposes, and I think I'm speaking for Marc here too, the AI was generating small amounts of text and the students would have to fill that in from there. So for example, if a student who didn't have a lot of writing experience used the counter-argument tool, got some ideas from those counter-arguments, that would at least outline or get them started on a paragraph or two. The students would have to write a little bit more to fill that in. So I could argue that that was helping the student with critical thinking skills because those were things that the student hadn't considered before. The AI helped them get to that point, and then those students would have to research that more, think about that more, and expand that into their essays. But it's a great question, and I think there would be a lot of divergent answers on that question.
Yeah, I appreciate the question too, Brooke, and I agree. It's definitely on my mind. I think that if you have a situation where a student hits generate and uses that for a starting point of their essay or the entire essay itself too, that gets in a really dicey area too, where the critical thinking skills are not being exercised. You probably have a very significant loss of learning in some way, shape, or form too. The way we used it, I guess as an analogy, at least the way I'm trying to think about it in our use case of as an AI assistant, is that it's a lot like the concept of tracing and drawing. That itself is a controversial topic too among artists as well too. But when you have an artist who gets to a situation where they don't know a specific sort of form, new line, or in my case, when I was doing this, I can't draw hands. Many people can't draw hands, right? So the idea is that you then trace something to help you get to that sort of position, and then you integrate that into the greater work. Now, how much tracing, how much would be allowed, how much generation is, I think, to me, the argument too, where to the point where it becomes then not just your own work, but someone else's that you're doing this. But to me, I think that's kind of how I'm trying to explain this to people too, is that very limited engagement with the technology to get past a pain point or something that you can't do natively on your own as a skill set, and then integrate that into your greater work and acknowledge that you're doing this, describe and reflect on how you're doing it too, is kind of sort of the process, or I'm sorry, just the process of sort of the practice that we're looking at with the tool sets too. The thing I think that's crazy about this is generative AI, once you actually have a rough draft that you've written on your own completely organically, if you enter that into ChatGPT, then ask it to give me 4 different conclusions, give me different thesis statements, and prove the actual quality of the writing. Then that sketch becomes reverse, where the actual AI is using your version of this to actually trace something and create something completely new. That opens up a whole new can of worms in terms of what this does to a person's learning and actual writing too. And just like tracing has been argued about for centuries now in art, I think we're going to have an argument about this for a very long time in writing.
So what I'm hearing then is that you in your classrooms have been using AI as a supplement, as a tool rather than a replacement for any of the writing or critical thinking that your students would otherwise be doing. Would you say that that characterization is correct?
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. I will say, and I've made my prompt available in some other situations for the argument paper. I did say on that prompt that students are welcome to use as much AI generated text in the final product as they want to. They just had to talk about that in the reflections on what was AI generated and what wasn't. I still found that most of the writing was, students would say most of the writing was their own. So yeah, I would definitely say for what we were doing, it was a supplement. Now, Marc and I are both planning on using more advanced technologies in this semester when we get into that. So next month, I'll be starting my argument unit, and I plan to use some products that definitely generate more text. So, we can revisit that question in a couple of months and see how that changes. But for the most part, my students were definitely using that to supplement their writing, maybe get them started in sections, that kind of thing.
So along those lines, you said that you have a whole bunch of data, a lot of student reflections on the process. How did your students feel about this overall, if you feel like you could make such generalizations?
I think my students were bewildered by it because they still don't understand it, even though we've talked about it a few times in the fall. I'm teaching with it now in different forms too in the spring semester that we're currently in. And the students are just basically, they don't know what to think. They don't know how to actually deal with it. We talk about different areas of this in our society too. Right now, we've just dealt with the Chinese spy balloons or the unidentified flying objects. One of the videos I showed to my students was a fake AI-generated video of Joe Biden, our president, saying that these were visitors from outer space. And it was so good, it's very difficult to discern what was actually real versus AI-generated. So that becomes a segue to begin talking about how our world and how the students are going to be interacting with this technology in the world and why they need to be literate about these technologies and use critical thinking when they explore anything they find on the internet and begin to question them too, is going to be really important.
So not just the process of composition, not just critical thinking, but information literacy, one of our favorite phrases in the library.
Yeah, absolutely, information literacy. And I think so, my students, like Marc's, a mixture of confused, excited, interested. If I go through my reflections, I've already coded a bunch of that, so I can start to break it down. So I've got individual documents where I'm starting to separate classifications. And so, for instance, one of those would be mentions of students feeling like they're cheating, like it's cheating. I told them, obviously, it's okay. No one's going to be in trouble for anything, but they would still write in the reflections, this feels like cheating. I know I'm allowed to do it, but feels like someone's doing some of the writing. So that was something that came up a lot. Also, and I mentioned this earlier on Brooke's question, you have a category of students who loved it and thought it was extremely helpful, were excited. They were excited about the future and potential of AI. So yeah, it definitely, I would certainly say there's no monolithic structure for, how students think and approach the use of AI.
Just out of curiosity, y'all said that you're sitting on some of the best and most comprehensive data possibly in the world. You are planning to publish this, right?
At some point, when I stop having to do presentations every 5 minutes, yes, I will sit down and breathe and stop crying constantly. And that was my screen. We can publish it. I kind of joke there, but the generative AI landscape seems to be changing weekly. It's going to be hard to really sort of escape. And we just need to sort of sit down and start thinking about how this is going to impact us as teachers in our education and how this is going to probably evolve into a practice in different disciplines about how you introduce this. And all at the same time, being very aware of the ethical limitations, the bias that's actually produced by some of the data sets and that is presented by the technology.
Yeah, we've got good support though too. So our chair, Stephen Monroe, was behind this from the start. So, we met in the summer, and obviously I think there was a lot of people who were, were uninformed at that time. Some who were informed probably, Marc knows, saw this as terribly problematic. So the fact that Stephen was willing to get out in front and want to embrace what potential AI had for students, that was a huge boost for us. And he was encouraging us to get in. He even participated. He taught one section in the fall and used some AI too. So having support from the top is always key to moving forward on a research project.
And I think at an earlier point, Marc, you said that we were in the moral panic stage of this whole thing. And it sounds like from the beginning, your group has been trying to sort of push past that moral panic into some more practical areas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We definitely looked at this and realized that there are going to be implications for how students use this once they graduate and they actually go into their actual careers. It is going to be something that they're going to have to interact with their world. It's not really possible to ban generative AI because it's not just a single app. People think about that when they say ChatGPT, but there are dozens upon dozens of language models that are just like ChatGPT, in some cases even bigger. BERT, which is the version that I guess China's answering with Ernie, is Google's model too, and it was about 500 billion parameters. So there's really a lot of different types of this technology out there. And they also then, these companies contract with APIs to thousands of different apps that can use it in different ways too. That's what Elicit and Format were. They were just using OpenAI's GPT-3 API to actually power their tools. So it is going to be definitely something that everyone has to do, and getting past that panic is very important to understand how students are going to be dealing with this. And we found out a few weeks ago that Microsoft is now moving ahead to integrate this into their Office suite. So it's going to be in Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. So it can't really be avoided in some ways.
What advice would y'all have for someone who is interested in learning more about this or in becoming involved with it at the university or community level?
Bob Cummings, the over in CETL, has been active in reaching out to people interested in learning more about AI or who are doing things with AI in their departments. The next meeting, Marc, May 25th, I think.
25th, yeah.
I think that'd be advertised and people would be welcome to participate in that or come and hear and learn more about it. Bob's also interested in trying to organize kind of an SEC consortium where reaching out to schools, other schools in the SEC, and seeing what they're doing. Which is great, because I think one of his goals is if you feel like you're interested in your department but no one else is, that might be a way to learn more about how others in the field are using it. We're lucky in this department because we've got some people right here where we can talk to each other each day. But I would totally get kind of feeling on an island if I were the only one in the department interested in doing something. And so I think that networking on your own campus and then using those resources, Bob Cummings and Noel Wilkins are kind of doing the outreach on this issue and seeing what's going on at other schools, how we can network with them. Those are great ways to get involved in a lot of potential projects. I know there are grants available, a lot of different things where you can dip your feet in small ways and large ways. I think right on campus happening now. I've been doing a lot of reading, trying to think about how to progress with my own research. If you pick up, if you go onto any major newspaper, any major websites at this point, you're likely to see something talking about how AI is being used in both academic and non-academic ways. One of the coolest things I think for us as academics is that you're seeing a lot of references to the academic. We're getting center stage here. So there are Marc mentioned Kevin Roos earlier from the New York Times. A lot of these authors, tech writers, all these things are covering AI, and they're coming to academics, teachers, administrators, instructional designers, to see how things are what's happening in the college level, what's happening at the K through 12 level. So, we're at a really interesting point in this, and people who are teaching or who are in academia are in really interesting positions to be able to have a say-so in what happens moving forward.
Brooke, Harley, did either of you have any follow-up questions that you wanted to ask before we wrap things up?
I guess if you were to just be able to give a really quick, almost like an elevator pitch to address, how do the public and, people on campus balance those levels of concern? So, we're talking about algorithm biases. That's a real concern. But also, as you said, they're using text generators on their phones and they don't blink an eye at that. So kind of, if you only had a few minutes to talk to somebody who has that knee-jerk reaction to talking about AI, how would you talk to them about that balance of concerns and potential?
I think really focusing on the fact that it's a tool, and it's a tool that if you use it effectively and ethically can maybe help you save both time and sort of your actual process, but that also does take an investment on your part to learn the ethics behind it too, the potentials and dangers and the bias, and really focus on the fact that this might be a practice that evolves over time. I talked to my students too. We were doing a technology class on writing too, and I brought out my cell phone and I said, just looked at my smartphone. It's like, how much of your world now revolves around this single device? How much of your world and your action with it do you do? And when you kind of put these things into context about how just a simple thing like the smartphone changed the way they interact with the world, then they can kind of start thinking about how something like a actual generative AI might also impact what they're going to be doing going forward too. So those types of things are hopefully helpful. I don't really have any elevator pitch right now. Please, someone make me one. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do an elevator pitch about how I can describe generative AI to people. I need that.
I'll give it a quick shot here, Marc. I would say education has never benefited from turning its back on progress. And I'll give you some specific examples, including a librarian example, right? So there were many people who were upset about the digitization of resources. People, and I'll even say me, I'm getting up there in age, right? It couldn't imagine not going to the library and looking at books to, going through and having those stacks of books to write major projects like theses or dissertations. The online learning was another flashpoint where, this is terrible. This is the end of education. We know that's not the case. Obviously, there's work to be done there, but it'd be the same with AI. And I'll give you another great example from a scholar on our campus, reference Bob Cummings again. The advent of Wikipedia in the 2000s was supposed to be the death knell for writing and education, because students were just turning in things that were on Wikipedia. And so if you go back and look at the reaction to that, teachers would ban Wikipedia, schools would, couldn't access Wikipedia on computers. Bob Cummings embraced Wikipedia and said, how about we show how Wikipedia is part of knowledge creation? And, he wrote a book on it, had students work on becoming contributors to Wikipedia. I think it's a matter of embracing what it does, as Marc said, embracing what a technology does and showing how it becomes part of a learning process and how it becomes part of critical thinking, and not turning our backs on things, because that I just don't see how that's going to benefit. There will always be workarounds and ways to circumvent rules that are in place.
I want to thank both of you, Guy, Marc, for your time. I know that this is something that you've been asked to do a lot, but I feel like you have been making a good show of being communicators and ambassadors on this particular issue. And hopefully folks in the campus community will be able to learn some more things and assuage some of that moral panic that we were talking about, and ultimately engage with this in a productive way.
Well, thank you,
Thanks
Alex.
for joining us.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, it's Alex Langhart, Director of University Health Services at the University of Mississippi. I'm obsessed with public health and its history, and I'm excited for this opportunity the Roundabout Oxford podcast has given me to share my passion with you in a series called What's Plaguing Us? Today, we're going to be talking about the future of healthcare and the role of artificial intelligence. AI is a rapidly growing field with the potential to revolutionize the way we approach healthcare. From diagnostics to treatment planning, AI is being used to improve the accuracy, efficiency, and accessibility of healthcare services. With the increasing amount of data being generated by electronic health records and wearables, AI will be able to provide even more accurate and personalized health recommendations. And as AI technology continues to improve, it has the potential to greatly improve the way we approach healthcare and deliver better outcomes for patients. Pretty good, huh? Wish I could take credit for that intro, but that was actually what ChatGPT produced after I gave it the prompt to write an intro about the future of AI in healthcare for a podcast. ChatGPT is an AI language model developed by OpenAI that uses deep learning techniques to generate human-like text based on the input it receives. Now, fiery debate has already erupted on the ethics, pros, and cons of utilizing technology like this. To many, it optimizes workflows, allows for better decisions, and unburdens the tedious tasks from the end user. To others, it's a nightmare that opens the door for new ways of cheating, spreading misinformation, and the beginning of the rise of Skynet. But let's not go looking to protect Sarah Connor just yet. AI is already being used in healthcare, and the results and future implications are promising. At this point, though, you probably don't trust it is even me telling you this. But seriously, how could AI find any benefit in pleading its case on a large podcast platform with a trusting voice? Don't think too much about it. Let's get into it. The process of finding novel drugs to treat diseases is complicated, lengthy, and costly. Research is still trial and error. However, AI is being used to accelerate drug discovery by analyzing vast amounts of patient outcome data from the clinical trials. So this helps narrow down what compounds researchers can focus on, expediting the development process. Many of us are aware of robots being used in surgery for more precision, but did you know that same technology is being used in decision-making? University of Florida researchers are using machine learning algorithms to predict what patients are at higher risk for complications before and after surgery. This allows them to plan interventions to avoid those problems. CTs and MRIs, they're both able to be read more accurately and quickly, aiding in early detection of issues like strokes. Orlando Health is looking to launch a new remote patient monitoring system that takes physiological signal data from patient sensors such as heart rate, blood pulse wave, heart rate variability, respiration rate, and others. It can analyze more than 120 biomarkers and applies its AI machine learning techniques to flag changes in at-home patient conditions that could indicate disease progression. All of this is a game changer for a system that is already plagued with high cost, accessibility issues, and fragmented care. A report from Harvard and McKinsey states AI could save the U.S. up to $360 billion annually through improved clinical operations, quality, and safety. Better care means better outcomes, which improves quality of life. I'm excited about what the implications for wellness and preventive health monitoring will be. We need to stop being reactive. We need to be proactive in our healthcare. AI gives us the tools to do just that. There are still many challenges ahead, many questions unanswered. Are AI systems appropriately trained? Who is doing the training? Are they accounting for social determinants of health? What happens to all this data being collected? Who has access to it? Even Stephen Hawking, when asked about AI, said, quote, "It will either be the best thing that's ever happened to us, or it will be the worst thing. If we're not careful, it very well may be the last thing," end quote. It is very exciting, but we need to make haste slowly. But what do I know? I'm just a human. Thanks for listening to this segment of What's Plaguing Us.
Roundabout Oxford was created by Brian Corrigan, Taylor Fields, Alan Munschauer, Abigail Norris Davidson, Christina Streeter, and Alex Watson. Today's episode was produced by Elizabeth Batt, Brian Corrigan, Sarah Catherine Glass, Brooke Gross, Harley Rogers, and Alex Watson, with musical contributions from Brian Corrigan and Gail Herrera. Thank you for listening to Roundabout Oxford.